Good morning. Today we're in front of the Miles Bates House in Palm Desert, also known as the Wave House by Walter White. The Historical Society, spearheaded by Merilee Colton and the Cultural Preservation Committee, got together to get this house as a nationally registered historical site. The owners, Stainer Architects, and their contractor Kevin O'Donnell did an incredible job restoring this gem back to its original self. This presentation is about our journey with the Bates House and the Walter White exhibit from a couple of years ago. If you enjoy our presentation tonight, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to join the Historical Society of Palm Desert, go to www.hspd.org and hit the join button. Thank you.
Is there a button to turn on?
Does this make a difference? Okay, thank you. My co-speakers today are going to be Mark Zimmer, who is on the board and was the inspiration behind the Walter White exhibition at the Johnson Center, and Rob Pitchford, who's on the board and who will be our president starting July 1st. And is currently our vice president. And a little later on, as we get into the program, I will be introducing Cady, who has some memories of Miles Bates she would like to share. And Graybill is also going to say a little bit about the Cultural Preservation Committee. This was, the whole effort was a group effort between the Historical Society, the Cultural Preservation Committee, and the City of Palm Desert. It was actually the City of Palm Desert staff that had the innovative idea of linking the sale of the Bates House, which had to be sold since the redevelopment agency was defunct, and it was a redevelopment agency asset. But the city's idea was to link it to Modernism Week, to get as many eyeballs on the property as possible, so when it did go to auction, there would be the best chance possible to sell it to the right party. Kim Houskin has been very influential in both the Historical Society and the Cultural Preservation Committee. She couldn't be here tonight, but she did provide me with a little something I can read to you about the history of the committee's involvement beginning about 2006. I also want to point out to everybody that we have some brochures in the back. This is a brochure that was at the exhibition. If you didn't get one, please do. And the city developed a really nice brochure for the open houses that we had as part of the Modernism Week events, and also for the lecture that Professor Volker gave. And he wrote the book on Walter White. He'll be part of our story as well. The Art, Design, and Architecture Museum at UC Santa Barbara has all the Walter White papers. They have those because towards the end of his life, when White was in Los Angeles and suffering from dementia, he fortunately had the presence of mind to give them to the Art, Design, and Architecture Museum. A man named Kurt Helfrich was the curator at that time. These are from Kim's memories. He befriended Walter White and received the entire collection. UCSB grad students organized it, curated it, and around 2006, the city's Cultural Preservation Committee became concerned about the fate of the house. So Kim contacted Kurt at UCSB and began a conversation that resulted in Bob Pitchford, Rob's father, going to UCSB to view the collection, and primary among that collection was the Miles Bates House. Kim offered to track down addresses. Apparently the collection had 668 projects in it. Most of them were unidentified because White did not write addresses on his plans. And often didn't even write people's names. So to identify a plan, you need the address and you need the original owner. And in fact, the Cultural Preservation Committee did find a lot of the original owners. In 2009, Kim wrote again to Kurt to inform him that the City Redevelopment Agency had purchased the Bates house and planned to keep it for housing, which was good news because at the time it was sold, it could have gone to anyone. And at least at this point, the plan was to maintain the house. Following that, Professor Velter contacted in 2010 the Historical Society, and in, I believe, 2015 spent practically the entire summer in our archives. UCSB had the drawings. The Historical Society had the story. So the story that is told in the book is a result of his work in our archives and, of course, his contacting the family. So that's kind of a little background. For those of you who don't know, the redevelopment agency that purchased the house, the city's redevelopment agency purchased the house 3 years ago, was dissolved by the state of California, and everything that was an asset had to be sold. Had to be sold. And the final date was June 30, 2018. So we got involved in this just about a year ago. We knew about it for quite some time, but we got actively involved in this just about a year ago because, and when we found out that we had just a little over a year to make sure that this house went to the right party and that it would be protected no matter who it went to, we started the process of national designation. So we hired a consultant. We started a GoFundMe website and got some very nice donations from a lot of the Palm Springs preservationists and from Poppy Woody, who was Walter White's daughter. And we managed to hire a consultant who successfully brought home the national designation nomination right under the wire. Literally 2 weeks before the auction. It was very trying. It feels like the last year has been a blur. So a little bit of history about Walter White. He was born in San Bernardino, and he didn't go to have formal training. He apprenticed himself out to architects in Los Angeles. During the war, he was a machine tool designer at Douglas Aircraft. He also built small cabins for returning GIs in the Hollywood Hills. Sorry to say none of those are still there. Then he moved his family here to Palm Desert in 1949, opened his design studio right next to the Red Barn. It's not there anymore, I don't think. No, but that's where it was.
Metal shop?
And befriended Miles Bates while at the Shadow Mountain Club, likely. The Shadow Mountain Club was just about the only place in town. So Miles Bates, we'll hear Ann talk about him shortly, but he had the money and the interest and the artistic ability to think outside the box and hire this fantastic architect to build a couple of homes and design even more. So without further ado, Ann, would you like to tell us about Miles Bates?
Okay. Well, you're going to hear a little about Palm Desert as well. And strangely enough, I bought a house that Miles Bates owned, another house, and I was redoing it. It's mid-century modern up in Kalia Hills. I was redoing it, and I'm a member of the board of trustees of UC Santa Barbara. And so the gal who was the curator of the museum said, "Oh, you've got to see our archives." So she showed me, this is a small world, she showed me Walter White, some of the materials that he had, and also Albert Frey. They have everything that Albert Frey, down to the shades that he pulled up and down, the grouting between the tile. I mean, it was so detailed. The collection from Frey was absolutely amazing. But I digress a little. I was lucky to do that, and that kind of helped me with my remodeling of this house. I met Miles Bates playing tennis at the Shadow Mountain Club, and it was the beginning of a wonderful friendship and lots of tennis games. We often played with Cliff Henderson, and he was known as the father of Palm Desert. Every Christmas, Cliff gave my sister and me a case of tennis balls. He was a generous guy, and we thought he was an old guy, you know, he kind of was in those days. But he was very competitive, and Miles played with us, and we had a lot of fun. Our family came to the desert on weekends, as we lived in San Marino, California, and we made the long drive down, and there were no freeways at that time. And my parents and aunt and uncle homesteaded in Kauai Hills, 2 miles up Highway 74. Each had 5 acres. And Miles, they luckily joined the Shadow Mountain Club because my sister and I probably would not have agreed to come down if we didn't have a place to swim and play tennis and have some fun. Miles met my parents and was often a visitor at our cabin for dinners and late nights. Daddy had many chaise lounges, which we would retire to after dinner, and we'd look at the stars and we'd just talk. It was kind of a slow, relaxed life in those days. Miles always brought wine to dinner, and he really loved my parents. Maybe he missed such a family life growing up, very wealthy family. And we had a lot of fun adventures with him. He had a Willys Jeep, which he later gave to my father, and he would take it up, we would go up Highway 74, and for some reason he'd go up the dirt road where it says Santa Rosa Mountain, and there was a guy who built this cabin up there, and it was for hikers to stay in overnight. Amazing. I mean, it was open and there were supplies there, and I think it's been vandalized by now. But we all loved it up there. And at some point, Miles brought the cabin next door to our house, which had been built by Dick Clayton. Now, Dick Clayton was a Hollywood agent to people like James Dean, Rock Hudson, Tab Hunter, Debbie Reynolds, to mention a few. And this was a hideout, literally a hideout. And they frequently visited the cabin next door to us. And it was amazing because it was a one-room place with an outhouse and a little kitchen. And around the perimeter of the living room were kind of mid-century sofas, but they were just flat, you know, with bolsters so you could sit there during the day or sleep at night. So I still have those because they were there when I got rid of a couple of them. But, and there was an outhouse, as I said. There's a huge fireplace, small kitchen. In those days there was no water, no electricity, and it was kind of roughing it, but we loved it. And I remember Mother was so upset when electricity came, you know. Well, you know, it took a little of the charm out of the, you know, the candlelight and the fireplace in the evening. But we all had a lot of fun. When Miles bought the cabin, he sort of left it the way it was. He added the turquoise chairs, which you may have seen at the Jocelyn Center if you went to the exhibit there. And the turquoise chairs and some of his artwork, but basically it was the same. He loved it up in Kauai Hills. He still had the roller coaster roof, as we called it, house. But this was his getaway, and he always came when we were there. We also went to the roller coaster house mostly to play music, because he had a fantastic stereo system, unbelievably good. And he would play music, and we would play the congo and the bongo drums to this music. We just had a blast. You may have seen the congo drum, which I still have, and it was with the turquoise chairs there. And then we sometimes went into Palm Springs. I can't remember the name of the place that they let us play improv to the music, the drums. Was it the Dollhouse? Does anybody remember? Yeah. Was there such a place, the Dollhouse?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
It was on the south end of Palm Canyon.
And it was called the Dollhouse, wasn't it?
I still have a match folder from it.
Okay, well, we used to go there. It was a lot of fun. We grew quite close over the years. He had the famous Mercedes Gullwing, which was crashed by the mechanic, if anybody remembers that. But before it was crashed, he used to let me take the car back to San Marino for like a week at a time. And I'd drive it into the high school parking lot. And you can imagine the guys oohing and ahhing over this car. It was really fun. And then he taught me how to race cars. And I learned out on Dillon Road. There was nothing around there then. And I learned in his Osca, O-S-C-A. It was an Italian car. And then when the Palm Springs car races came along, which were held at the airport, they closed the airport down and they made a track around there. He figured I could enter the ladies' race. So I did. And I think I came in 7th out of about 15 cars. And it was probably the most daring thing I ever did, and I never told my parents. One summer, Miles invited our family to spend the summer at their cabin on Madeline Island, which is a part of the Apostle Islands in Lake Superior. So it was really a beautiful island. We got to know everyone on the island, playing tennis on the clay tennis courts, and people had bowling alleys in their basements, and it was quite upscale. Miles painted occasionally there, and I thought his work there was rather dark, and he was more moody back there. I don't know, maybe he missed the desert sunshine, but there was kind of a difference in his personality back there. He had a Chris Craft speedboat, which we took out and picnicked on another island where we could pick berries, which he thought was a great idea. But coming home one afternoon, there were huge waves. I had no idea that a lake could have these enormous waves. And I thought we were goners, but we made it. We did make it. I just lost my enthusiasm for that boat after that. Miles' house was always full of books, records, musical instruments, neat things. I mean, he had a lot of money, so whatever he bought the finest, the best. But it was kind of a bohemian atmosphere. But back then we didn't call it bohemian because we were kind of, we were sort of that way, We used the fireplace. It was funny, when I went to see the house, there was no fireplace, and I kept looking and thinking, where's the fireplace? It was the central part of the house, and finally we saw a fan up in the ceiling, and there was a hole, and we determined that was where the fireplace had been. It was one of the Swedish kind that came down. But he loved to use that fireplace. He was very proud of it. And if in the winter, if it dipped the temperature a little, he'd put a fire in there because he loved the atmosphere. And he cooked. He could cook. He could cook a good meal, which was nice. And then outside, Walter White had all these fancy plans for landscaping in the backyard. Well, Miles was not the kind of person who cared about landscaping. The backyard he was a sculptor, and he welded with big, huge pieces of metal. Well, the backyard was covered with these pieces of metal sculpture laying all over. So I don't think that the landscaping ever happened, to be honest. I don't remember it. Well, I said Miles was generous about only the best of whatever he purchased. He bought me a gorgeous kind of tan-colored cashmere sweater and skirt to match. If you remember those days, some of you do, that's what the gals wear. And then I went off to college, and I didn't see much of Miles, and my focus in my life changed. years later, I was visiting my parents, and I bought my aunt and uncle's cabin, their homestead cabin. I was up there, it was the strangest thing, and my parents had my children down at their house. You know, we're kind of next door, it's a walk. And all of a sudden, somebody knocked at the door, and it was Miles. And I hadn't seen him in years. And he stayed well into the night, and we caught up and we talked, and it was a wonderful time, and it was the last time I ever saw him. He died, and my dad and I both spoke at his funeral, which was held in an outdoor amphitheater in, I think, Encinitas, down that way. So he had some of his paintings and sculpture were there at the funeral. Beautiful amphitheater. And there was a reception there afterward, and his shoes were placed next to the fireplace. Which was, anyway, that's...
So before we get on to the actual description of this fabulous house, Don, would you say something about the Cultural Preservation Committee's efforts to have the house designated locally?
I'll try. Yeah, Kim Merilee is the one that spearheaded the interest in the Miles Bates house. I'm sorry she can't be here. But I got involved with it a little bit before '08, and '06, I guess. If any of you remember Jan Holman, she really was interested in cultural preservation. We didn't call it that at the time, it was just historic preservation. And the city in '08 changed the committee to a different, they rewrote the code for the historic preservation, and so now it's called the Cultural Resources Preservation Committee. And if you want to look that up, if anyone wants to guess what place on the city website you would go to, give me an idea. Where would you go to find the Cultural Resource Preservation Committee? Historical? I don't think it'll get you there. Building and safety. And we have a very good staff person. Yeah, if you go to Building and Safety, and the person in charge of that is called Russell Grange. Grant. I never know how to pronounce Russell's last name. He's really interested in cars and fancy, old-fashioned fancy cars and stuff like that. But he's a very good liaison for the city and very interested in cultural resource preservation. And so we're very blessed to have Russell and his secretary both there to help us out. But actually, in a way, they changed the fact that it made to the committee was where any applications had to be presented to the city and to the committee, and they would be required to fill out the application. That was the new thing. Before, we could kind of do it on our own, and now the people that own the home are required to fill out the application. And so it's made it a little awkward, particularly for me, because I love to fill it out and get it going and everything, but that's not how it works. But they just thought it was better just to have the homeowners do the application itself, so they don't have any feedback later on. And from that time, if you notice, this building right here is the third one that was ever recognized by the committee. And what happens is the committee gets these applications, and of course if the city owns it, in which the city owns this building, so kind of Russell and the committee work together to get it done. But that was accomplished. It had to be after '08. Does anyone happen to know the first one that was nominated? Brett, you can't raise your hand. That's a hint, though. The firehouse. Yeah, that was the first one that was recognized by the city, and we're #1 at the firehouse, and we're real proud of that. especially being on the preservation committee. So, and then this was number 3. And number 4, let's see, which one? 2 was the, if you don't mind this little history, here's the plug for the committee here, so if you don't mind. Do I have a minute? 2 minutes, okay, real quick. 2 was the Shadow Mountain Golf Course, and that is the first district that the city has. It has 7 different parcels to make up that, and that's the only one that I know of that presently is under the Miles, or the Mills Act. Yeah, the California has a very nice incentive for cultural resource preservation, for historic preservation, and it's called the Mills Act, and it was done by a congressman down in San Diego. And what they do is they cut almost your property taxes in half if you're accepted as a historical site. And so it's quite an incentive, and the golf course took advantage of that. And they're the only one that are presently under the Mills Act, although Russell is busy with other applications that come from Shadow Mountain, or Sandpiper, that have been applied for different, and each one of those homes that are applying for the Mills Act has to be done separately. So, and it's a 10-year program. It's quite complicated, but it's really worth it if you want to save half your property taxes every year. So anyway, we've also recognized Randall Henderson's home, which was number 7, I think. And Miles Bates is number 8. Yeah, and that's the last one. And that's the only one that's ever been recognized nationally. But it's not the only one that could have been recognized nationally. We have a very important building very close to us, even closer to the Miles Bates place, right now from where we're sitting. Does anyone have an idea what that building could have been recognized and still could be recognized nationally?
The church?
The church? It has been recognized. It was the first church, but no, not national recognition. I don't think it would qualify, although the other building was the first. Well, think of a newspaper or a magazine. Yeah, the Desert Magazine, where the right there at the end of El Paseo and 111, and you can hardly even recognize it. But that building was. It's kind of a sore spot with us because it could have been nationally recognized, and it still could be, but the owners have to do it, and they don't want to. Yeah. Yes?
Don, is the church across the street on the historical? I've never seen.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
what number that would be?
Yeah, it's number 4.
Number 4. Okay.
Yeah, this is 3 and 4. The religious science, not religious science, it's the spiritual center. Yeah, it was actually first called Shadow Mountain Country Club Community Church. Shadow Mountain Community Church. Yeah. And when the pastor that put that together, one of his sermons one day when they were raising money to build that thing, he was giving a sermon on a mount, and he did it on a horse at the Shadow Mountain Club. So really, they had their first sunrise, so anyway, okay, I got carried away. Yeah. Goodbye.
Thank you, Don, for all your energy and for serving on that committee for so very long. We really appreciate it. I'm going to hand it over to Mark and Rob, who are going to talk about the house.
I feel. Hello. My name is Mark Zimmer. I feel a little out of place here. I've only lived in Palm Desert for not quite 15 years, but we love it here, and I'm here tonight to learn about as much as the rest of you about the house and about Palm Desert. Kim Houskin kind of roped me into this a couple of years ago. I was found out about the Bates house through her, and she gave me the Walter White, or the Welter book, and from that I became interested in pursuing the house and its preservation, and went up to the archives of UC Santa Barbara to do some research and look into it. And I was amazed to find that Walter White had done over 40 buildings, residents mostly, in Palm Desert, and I just felt that this was something the rest of Palm Desert had to learn about. And I was kind of shocked that the city owned the property, and it was the redevelopment agency that had it, and I thought that that was the kiss of death. But in getting a chance to get into it and look at it, I thought it would be nice to share my interest and my excitement over the house with everybody else in Palm Desert. Kim also showed me the exhibit that UCSB had, I think it was in 2015, and it was of all of Walter White's work. And I was so impressed with that that I felt we should see something like that here in the desert. It was a shame that everything was up there at UC Santa Barbara and we couldn't be able to experience it here. So my idea was to try to recreate that exhibition here. And so I spoke with Jocelyn White at she was the archivist at UCSB, and she was wholeheartedly behind the idea. And she said, all you need is a space, and it has to be well lit, air conditioned, and humidified, and so forth and so on. And this was, I think, October last year. And my intention was to try to launch this exhibition for Modernism Week, thinking that that's the time we would get the most eyes on it. And in my naive way, I just launched into it, went to the Historical Society and said, well, I'll do the show, no problem. Jocelyn offered assistance and said, sure, we can ship you these items. Well, after looking around, I could not find a place to do the show where we had climate control, security, special lighting. So the idea of bringing all of Walter White's original works, his drawings, models, and so forth, and photographs, was out of the question.
Volker tried very, very hard to get the same exhibit in the Palm Springs Museum, because he felt that this was, part of the desert heritage, and we had it up there in Santa Barbara, which was fabulous, but, it would have been meaningful to have it here at the museum.
Exactly.
They turned him down.
Well, it takes a little more than 3 or 4 months to plan something like this. And my interest was really to bring everyone's attention to Walter White's work. And even if we had to Xerox these things and mount them on the wall, which we practically did, that was to bring attention to the house and hopefully save it and get people interested when the auction came up, to really be motivated in restoring it. So we ended up having to pick images and then copy them and have them reprinted. And then we did the exhibition with reprinted images, which actually turned out pretty well. And my goal is still to bring the original work down here, because when you see his drawings up close, it's just something that takes you back to that time. Nobody hand draws, plans anymore, and it's really something to see his hand drawings, and his drawings are labeled Walter S. White, not an architect, because he wasn't. I thought that was kind of his sales pitch. It wasn't. The state didn't allow him to say he was an architect, because he wasn't. He was not licensed. didn't actually become licensed until he moved to Colorado Springs, where he became a licensed architect in Colorado Springs, I think in the 70s, and then moved back to California, and then Los Angeles got his license, I think when he was in his 70s, in the late 80s or early 90s. But anyhow, so I made a couple trips up to Santa Barbara to look at works, trying to figure out which ones to show. Then suddenly got hit, you know, we're into November, December, and of course, Modernism Week is starting in February, and all of a sudden, the fires hit around just south of Santa Barbara, north of Los Angeles, and UC Santa Barbara was shut down, and they stopped finals, and Jocelyn White was out of the picture, Julia Larson, all the people I've been talking to about getting these images. Suddenly, I had no show, and I just kind of figured it all would work out, which it kind of did. Rob and I went up a second time, or I went a second time, Rob went up with me the next time, and this was after they finally reopened the school. It was the 1st of January, and so we frantically went through a lot of the images to try to sort out what we could show, and we found some interesting things. You know, in looking at the Miles Bates house, I'm always interested in construction. Obviously, I'm a contractor, and I do residential remodeling, but restoration is kind of a passion that I hope to be more involved in. In looking at the plans and looking at the house as it existed, it's interesting to find, you know, little nuances and things that were covered up by years of remodeling. And a couple things that Rob and I found. We were looking at plans of the sun lodges that Walter White did. They no longer exist. But the plans had these kitchen cabinets labeled, and they were called cabinets. And couldn't figure out what that was. And then later on, Rob found online that there was a company called the Murphy Cabinet, and they built steel cabinets, kitchen cabinets. They were like modular units, and it was the same guy that invented the Murphy bed, did these cabinets, and they were steel. I guess they were popular when I was a kid, and some of you may remember, but Walter White actually designed these small apartments, the sun lodges, to have these modular units put in. And the reason it came up is, you know, we were curious about the name Cabernet, but it came up because one of the pictures of the Miles Bates house showed these shiny cabinets in the background in the kitchen. And of course, it's not on the plan. The plans showed, you know, just a standard wood cabinet with a masonite door, sliding door on it. But the bottom units were these shiny things in the picture. And sure enough, this is a catalog for the Murphy Cabernet. So we're pretty sure that the Miles Bates house had this modular unit put in there. Whether it was Miles' idea or they ran out of money and they just did this, or whether it was just a fashionable thing at the time. Maybe we could find that other picture of the house later, the interior of the kitchen. I don't know. I know that's on the slideshow. Anyhow, it was something that was interesting. But every time we looked at the plans, we'd find some other little thing. The jalousie windows that were next to the front door, which are not there now because they've been covered up with brick. Okay, well, can't find it now, but we'll get to it. Anyhow, one of the things, another thing Rob came up with was a great idea of building a model for the exhibition. And I don't know why this is actually the patent for the roof, and this is what makes the Miles Bates house. Sorry, it's not very clear. I think it's trying to load. But this is the thing that makes the Miles Bates house unique. This particular roof design doesn't exist on any of his other homes, even though he came up with this idea for a bigger home to be built in Palm Springs. It was also going to be Miles Bates' home. And it was supposed to be up, I'm trying to think, I think Panorama Road. Can't remember the name of the road, but it's up in Little Tuscany. And that house was supposed to be a pretty grand house using this particular patent and this roof design. But the car crash and the loss of family funding or whatever caused them to scale down and build the smaller version of this house, which was the roller coaster roof house. And so anyhow, Rob suggested we make a model for the show, which I did, and sitting in the back there. We took a couple of trips out to the house to measure, you know, the roof. There's actually a skeletal portion of the roof that trails down on the east end of the house. And so by going out and measuring it, I had to go out and measure it twice, maybe I think even 3 times, because I couldn't believe it. They're just 2x4s and closet pole rods. There's nothing fancy about it, which is kind of the unique thing about Miles Bates. I mean, Walter White, is he had simple ideas that he did in kind of a grand way. His homes were not extravagant throughout most of the desert. They were fairly simple, but he had these nice little touches that he would do that made them unique. And I actually think there are several other homes here in Palm Desert that could be historically mentioned, like the Stewart House. I think it's on Juniper.
Pinion.
Oh, Pinion, okay. That house is an incredible house and one of his better designs. And so I think there's a lot more that can be done with his homes. In any case, we did the show, and I guess that's not going to come up. Yeah, the plans aren't. So after looking around for a climate-controlled, secure, perfectly lit space, we ended up at the Jocelyn Center, mostly because it was free, and they were enthusiastic about it, and it was just right behind the Bates house. They were very nice to let us set the show up there, and we tried to squeeze as many items as we could. I think we had over 100 images, and I got help from my neighbors, Susie O'Hare and Luke Leishner, who got excited about presenting the show. Luke is a 15-year-old historian to be, and he came up with the hangings that we did here. We did what's called a didactic, which is museum terminology for the introduction to the show. And we hung those. And then if you see in the background, Luke actually recreated Walter White's office. And Luke, even though he's 15, he collects mid-century modern items and books and pencils and radios. And we found a chair and a desk that looked very much like Walter White's in one of the photographs that we had. It kind of added to the ambiance of it and made the show a little more interesting. And of course, one of the other things that we wanted to do was publicize the show with a poster, and so I roped my friend Ray Jacobs into designing something for us here. And he's sitting here tonight. Ray is a well-known designer from Los Angeles, and he's come out here, retired here, and it was very nice to do this for us. And we hope to print up some more and sell them, because I think it's a really beautiful image. And actually, the artist that drew that rendering is still alive and living in Santa Monica right now. I don't know if we could ever get him out here, but it'd be interesting to see. So overall, I think we were pretty lucky to get the thing done just in time, and I'm pleased with the way it came out. As I said, my goal is to really bring the real original works out here and hopefully get the entire valley involved in it, and maybe, as Jocelyn, the archivist at UCSB, suggested, because they have so many other architects up there, you know, Albert Fry, you know, the Schindler and so forth, we might be able to include them in a similar type show. But we have to find the space, and of course, planning something like that takes time. But it was an adventure. It was fun. I'm sure I could do it quite like that again, but we got it done in the nick of time. And I don't know if you have any questions.
Not a question, but you did such a wonderful job on this. I think you need to thank the business.
Hello. I'm Ron Pitchford. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Mark and my adventures up in Santa Barbara. We went up on Friday, January 5th, and we spent the day with Julia Larson, who is the reference archivist for the Architecture and Design Collection at the Art, Design, and Architecture Museum at the University of Santa Barbara, which was founded in, or the Architecture and Design Collection was founded in 1963 by David Gebhardt, another professor there, and it is one of the largest architectural archives in North America. It houses more than 1 million drawings, photographs, and papers from architects all over the place, including Harwell Hamilton Harris and Rudolf Schindler, who Walter White apprenticed with. Also in the collection is Palm Desert's own John Outcalt. Closer, sorry. His work is housed there as well. So we spent the rainy day up in the archives, and when you're looking at the work of an architect, or just a portion of a work of an architect like White, a day really isn't enough time to look at all that neat work. I mean, it's, you know, we knew we had a time constraint, but they were like, oh, look at this. This is awesome. You know, I just sit there and look at something and like 15 minutes have gone by. So what Mark and I did was we took strips of paper and marked drawings that we wanted to have reproduced. And another thing we didn't want to do was just recreate Professor Welter's book for the exhibition. So we marked drawings that we wanted to have scanned by the UCSB, and for each scan there was a charge that we'd eventually have to pay. So at the end of the day, we estimated we had about $300,000. So we had to pare it way back. But you know, as you're going through things like the Wilcoxon House in India, the roof plan, which is a hyperbolic paraboloid, which, how many times do you get to say hyperbolic paraboloid in your daily conversations? We had to have that in the exhibition. So that was one of the ones that ended up in there. I think what we ended up with was quite a good representation of Mr. White's desert work, and I think he would have been happy with it. One other thing I wanted to mention was Merilee, Mark, and I, when we had all these images, we went to Valley Reaper Graphics over in Thousand Palms, where I get my printing done, and kind of told them what we wanted to accomplish with this exhibition. And those guys were gracious enough to sponsor all the printing for free. So that was a great help. We had to put up a big sign that said Valley Reaper Graphics.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's all right. So really, that's my 2.5 cents. Turn it back over to Merilee.
So it's time for questions. Anyone has any? Yes?
So who ended up buying it?
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, actually Cora would be here, Cora Garbush from the city, but she had surgery this week, so she couldn't come. Cora was responsible, she works in public works, she was responsible for putting on the auction, and she did a fabulous job. The auction was wonderful. The auction it was held out at UCR Theater, and it was held on the date of Miles Bates' 88th birthday.
Wow.
So we had a cake. I had a big sheet cake and happy birthday everywhere. And yeah, that would have been nice. So several people actually qualified to come in, because of course you have to have your cashier's check. The city sprung for a professional auctioneer who got caught in traffic and was a little late, but that was okay. And our consultant, Barbara Lamprecht, who was the person who got the national nomination for us, was there to speak about the house. And after she spoke, one of the gentlemen who was ready to bid called her outside. And when she came back, she was furious. She says to me, "He just asked me how much it would cost to tear it down." There were 3 people bidding, 3, and he was one of them. Seriously. But the winner of the house was a father and son team of architects, Stainer Architects, Stayner. Look them up on Google. Fabulous website. Very avant-garde group out of Echo Park. And they have promised the city that they will restore thoughtfully and will even have public access at some points in time. So hopefully, maybe even by next Martyrdom Week, we'll have another open house, but certainly at some point in the future. So it was a sort of a wild shot. You know, the city had to sell it. City staff came up with the idea of linking it to Martyrdom Week. They called us in to help. We had an open house and a lecture by Volker in October, for October Martyrdom Preview, and then an open house and a lecture in February, and then for the whole 11 days of Martyrdom Week, we had the exhibition and a big reception at the exhibition on one day. And then it was all culminated on the Saturday, the 24th of February, where the auction took place, and it worked out. But believe me, it might not have. And that's why the national designation was so terribly important, because even if that fellow had gotten it and wanted to tear it down, we'd have had him in court for about 3 or 4 years, and he might have changed his mind. So, anyway.
How much did it auction for?
It went for $20,000 more than it was appraised at, so the city looked good on all aspects of it. Innovative and made more money. And that was a good thing.
It's not for the city.
That's true.
It's for the State Department of Finance, but the positive result is very helpful in securing their approval, which is essential.
Right, yes, yes. That part of the redevelopment assets that all have to be sold as everything goes back to the state. And then it all comes back down to the little agencies or the school district and so on that were allegedly harmed by the fact there was a redevelopment agency. So it was just transferring money around. City didn't make anything on it, but they sure did a good job. And we were really happy to participate. So, yes?
I was gonna say, can you explain what it takes to get on a national registry? Apparently, you know, for that to be, boy, did the press go crazy with that house, didn't they?
Oh, yes, and you mentioned that earlier that we got a lot of publicity. We were in the LA Times, Orange County Register, San Jose Mercury News, which is a huge paper up there. We were in the San Francisco Chronicle, and we were in Architectural Digest.
Yeah,
Can you
that's
believe
cool.
that? How does that happen?
Yeah.
The Historical Society of Palm Desert gets mentioned in all these venues, and it's by linking to this house, and of course the city as well. And by the idea of the auction, that was what caught the press's eye. That was the clickbait. Was they're auctioning this house that's going to be on the National Register. So yeah, it was.
Where does the $50,000 come from, or did you actually raise that to give to the buyer?
The city council voted to use city funds for that.
Oh,
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was another thing that was a plus in the Senate. Yeah. Now,
Maybe for Rob, regarding the engineering on that roof, this was something new, wasn't it? The serpentine type of thing?
Yeah.
And you, the architect then didn't have actually an architectural license. So did you get it signed off? Did they get it signed off by an engineer? And in those days, was it?
No.
Did he sign the plans?
That's a good question. Engineering really wasn't required until-
Really, for something?
No.
For something like
In
that.
that day, they didn't care about it.
It must have been, don't you think it was tremendous?
No, I have to tell you, I drew plans, my dad and I drew plans for another house, and it was proved. So I'm telling you, this is the same error that we're talking about back then.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you take a piece of cardboard, I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean, it's a corrugated piece of cardboard, and Mark has noticed a little bit of deflection in it, but it's quite an interesting thing that, you know, he's taken a couple of compound, actually 2 curved glue lamps and bolted them together, so he's got the double curve, and then it just spans between the 2 glue lamps like corrugated cardboard. I mean, and it's held up incredibly. So
yeah, it's still in very good shape.
yeah.
The whole house is actually structurally.
Actually, I'm not sure exactly how they pinned it together because the diagram that he has for the patent doesn't really show how this was executed, because the diagram was changed when he actually did the roof with the 2x4s and the dowel. But they were glued together, so Walter White was kind of a self-made engineer as well as a self-made architect, and he was an inventor, and I think the fact that he glued these elements together added some strength, because these 2x4s and dowels are spanning over 20 feet, and I'm not sure that I would trust walking on that roof, but as Merilee said, they've held up, and I think, you know, it's the way he pinned it together and glued it. Now, when they do the restoration, they'll probably have to take a portion of that roof apart, and they might be able to analyze and see what he used. But the fact of gluing and pinning that probably added some strength, as well as you know, the glue lamps that they sit on.
Wasn't there a column or two also? Small, like a 3 or 4 inch pipe? I was looking at the plans at Jocelyn, and I'm not trained in that, but I used to love that part of the building. Weren't there a couple of columns?
There's some steel columns holding up the glue ends,
Yeah.
but nothing in between
Oh, okay.
in the span.
The longest span is what?
I think it's, I think it's just a little over 20 feet between the two glue lamps. I actually have a set of plans here. We can sit down and look at them. It's a little unusual, and I don't think it would pass code today.
Especially seismic.
Well, but the interesting thing about Walter White was concerned about seismic problems, and he designed his walls with the 90-degree corners, especially garden walls, to kind of in anticipation of seismic problems. And the fact that this house was basically a post and beam, the glue lamps are all held by steel posts. Any of the other walls are not attached to the roof, and all the masonry walls are separate, much like the Wilcoxon house in Indio. That house, the roof was built entirely first, and then the walls added later. So if the walls fell down, the roof would still stay up.
I'd like to add real quick that the Wilcoxon house, the roof is a hyperbolic parabola.
One more time.
Say that fast 5 times.
I want to ask a question. Now, as a contractor, and you get plans from an architect, do you talk to the architect about how you're going to execute these plans?
Yes, yeah.
Sometimes, in the old days, it really depends on the customer. The home architects traditionally should supervise and see the project through to the end to make sure that the house is executed the way they planned it. Most commonly, it doesn't happen that way today because of cost. Nobody wants to pay the architect to stand out there and watch the house being built. Walter White, I think, over a third of the homes he built, or over the third of the homes he designed, he actually built. He was his own contractor. That was his way of keeping control and making sure that they got built the way he wanted. But today, it's I say that for residential work, it's not common for the architect to be that involved. Commercial work, it's different because there's more expense and more liability.
One other thing, if the architect is worth his salt, he is detailed it enough so there's no questions on the site.
Says an architect.
In theory, yes. I find a lot of frustration in working with most plans that.
We have a question in the back.
I'm not going to let that fall.
I much admire Mr. White's work with his architectural work in the background of his home. He's an artist. It conforms to the mountains. It's beautiful.
Well, he was especially interested in the site. He spent a lot of time with his clients, especially Miles Bates. I mean, they were, I think, friends as much as client and architect. But when I talked to his daughter, Poppy Woody, she said that he spent a great deal of time with his customers, learning about their lifestyle, learning about the things that he should include in their home. And yes, it's obvious with the Wave house how it blends with the mountains in the background. I mean, he was very concerned about the siting of the house. He preferred to have corner lots because he had more flexibility with the design. And the house that's on the street that I live on, Buckboard Trail, the Johnson house is a corner-built house. And that was very much part of his design work because he liked to have two different views. And that's a beautifully designed home on Buckboard Trail.
I think it's time for the raffle, the drawing.
Last time, odds are very good. That's very good. Anybody else? All right, go ahead. Pick it out. Yeah, pick it out. And Merilee will announce it. Okay, here you go.
No, I won't, I don't have my glasses.
Oh, okay.
Who do we trust?
I know, I brought mine this time. Okay, yeah, the number is 362-8074. 8074.
Oh my God! Yeah, it was. Thank you.
That was the sixth one I brought up. I just have to make a comment. Don't you all think this is amazing? I mean, in Nashville, it's gone with all these people coming together and connecting, and these wonderful, and these such quality people here. I just think it's just so fascinating. I'm watching this whole thing going on, and they're telling me about the board meetings. I'm like, this is amazing. This is amazing. And I think they all deserve a round of applause.
Everyone for coming. Anyone who wants to stay behind and look at the plans with Mark, they're welcome to do so.